I never thought a simple phone call from my doctor could change everything I knew about my life. My name is Henry Carter, and I am 63 years old. For 38 years, I have been happily married to my wonderful wife, Susan. We've built a life together filled with love, laughter, and memories that I would never trade for anything in the world. I've always considered myself a healthy man, or at least reasonably so for my age. I exercised moderately, ate balanced meals, and tried to keep stress at bay. But life, as I was about to discover, had a way of throwing curveballs that I could never have imagined. It all started on a seemingly ordinary Wednesday morning. I was sitting at the breakfast table, sipping my coffee, going over my emails, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my doctor's office. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe it was a routine follow-up, or just a reminder for an upcoming appointment. But the tone in the receptionist's voice was unusually serious, almost urgent. She told me Dr. Matthews wanted to speak with me immediately about my recent blood test results. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't been feeling unwell, at least not in any way that would alarm me. I remember sitting down heavily on the chair, gripping the edges, as if I could somehow steady myself against an invisible wave of anxiety. What could it possibly be? I whispered to myself. My mind raced through every possibility, from minor issues to something far more serious. Dr. Matthews had always been cautious and thorough, but never overly dramatic. So for him to personally call me like this, it felt different. As I waited for the doctor to come on the line, my thoughts drifted back to my life over the past 38 years. I thought about the day Susan and I met, how we laughed until our sides hurt, the trips we took, the family we raised. Life had been steady, comfortable, predictable in the best way possible. But suddenly, that predictability seemed fragile, as though it could shatter with one sentence. When Dr. Matthews finally spoke, his voice was calm, but carried a weight that made my stomach tighten. "Henry," he began, "your blood test revealed something impossible." Those words hung in the air, heavy and almost surreal. Impossible? My mind immediately tried to rationalize. Maybe there was a lab error. Maybe he meant it was something rare, but explainable. But deep down, a tiny part of me already feared that this was something far beyond ordinary medical anomalies. I had always been someone who preferred to understand things logically. My career had been in finance, where details mattered, and assumptions could cost you dearly. So I tried to focus, to listen carefully as Dr. Matthews explained the results. Yet, the more he spoke, the more confused I became. The data didn't just suggest an unusual condition. It suggested something that, according to every medical textbook he'd ever read, shouldn't even exist in a human body. At that moment, I realized that life had placed me at the threshold of a mystery I could never have anticipated. A mystery that would challenge everything I thought I knew about myself, my health, and perhaps even my life's story. My hands shook slightly as I held the phone, and I felt a strange mixture of fear, curiosity, and disbelief. What could this mean for me? For Susan? For the life we had built together? As I hung up the phone, I sat back and tried to collect my thoughts. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, warm and familiar, but I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would ever be familiar again. Over the years, I had faced challenges, career changes, financial ups and downs, health scares, but this was unlike anything I had encountered. It felt bigger, more personal, more inexplicable. I decided I couldn't sit idle. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I went back to my desk, pulled out my medical files, and tried to review every detail I could remember about my health over the years. Diet logs, exercise routines, prior tests, everything seemed normal, yet nothing could explain the message I had just received. In that moment, I realized I was standing at the edge of a journey that would not only uncover the impossible truth about my health, but would also challenge the very understanding of who I was as a person. And as frightening as it was, a small part of me couldn't help but feel a strange excitement. Some mysteries are terrifying, yes, but they are also life-changing. And this was one of them. This. Little did I know, that single phone call would set in motion a chain of events that would reveal secrets buried deep within me. Secrets I had never imagined could exist. Secrets that had been waiting for 38 years to be discovered. After that call, I couldn't focus on anything else. The usual sounds of the house, the ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, even the distant chatter of birds outside seemed distant, almost muted, as if my mind had retreated into a bubble of uncertainty. I kept replaying Dr. Matthew's words over and over. Your blood test revealed something impossible. Impossible. The word refused to leave me. It lodged itself somewhere deep, refusing to let me forget, refusing to let me rest. I tried to return to my routine, telling myself that I needed to eat, to read, maybe even take a walk to clear my head. But every step felt heavy, as though the ground itself had become denser, pulling me down into a world where nothing was certain. I had always considered myself rational, analytical. I had spent my life dealing in numbers, logic, probabilities, and yet here I was, facing something that defied every formula I had ever known. I called Susan to tell her, or rather, to prepare her, but I couldn't find the words. How do you explain the impossible? How do you make someone understand a revelation that even you barely comprehend? I simply told her the doctor had called, and there was something unusual in my blood tests. She listened, her voice calm but tinged with concern, and said I shouldn't panic, that we'd face this together. Her calmness helped, slightly, but it didn't erase the gnawing anxiety inside me. The next day, I returned to Dr. Matthew's office. Sitting in the sterile room, I felt like I had crossed a threshold into another world. Charts, machines, vials of blood, everything suddenly seemed charged with an unspoken secret. The doctor handed me the report again, this time in person. I looked at it closely, line by line, trying to decipher the meaning behind the numbers and annotations. I wanted clarity, but the more I read, the more questions arose. "This doesn't make sense," I said finally, almost whispering, afraid that speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile world I was balancing on. Dr. Matthews nodded gravely. "I know. It shouldn't exist," he said, carefully choosing his words. "Your blood profile shows characteristics that, according to every known medical record, shouldn't be possible in a human being." I felt a chill. It wasn't just confusion, it was awe, fear, and a strange fascination all at once. Something deep inside me stirred. I had always believed that life had boundaries, rules we could predict and follow. And yet, here was a living example, right in front of me, that refused to fit into any rulebook. Over the next few days, I immersed myself in research. I scoured scientific journals, online medical forums, obscure articles about rare conditions. Every new piece of information both intrigued and terrified me. There were cases, yes, of extraordinary anomalies, but nothing exactly like mine. Nothing so precise, so paradoxical. Some days, I felt like I was peering into a dimension that was meant to remain hidden, a secret tucked into the very fabric of life itself. Sleep became elusive. At night, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying my memories, wondering if there had been subtle signs all along. Maybe the small aches I had brushed off, the brief moments of fatigue I attributed to age, or even patterns in my heartbeat that I had never noticed. They all felt like clues I had ignored. My mind raced with what-ifs and could-it-be's. Susan noticed the change in me. She would catch me staring blankly at nothing, jotting notes in a small notebook, or muttering numbers and phrases I barely understood. One evening, she asked softly, "Henry, are you okay? You seem distant." I wanted to tell her everything, but the truth was still unfolding. I couldn't explain the impossible yet. I could only share the uncertainty, and even that was difficult. I began documenting everything meticulously: my symptoms, my meals, my moods, Even the times I felt unusually energized or drained, I was desperate for patterns, for answers." End quote. The more I documented, the more I realized how little we truly understand our own bodies, how fragile and miraculous life can be. The human body, so familiar to me in theory, suddenly seemed like an alien landscape filled with mysteries I had never imagined. Then came a moment I will never forget. While reviewing my notes late one night, I noticed something peculiar, something in the data that seemed to echo the findings in the blood report. A pattern, subtle yet undeniable, that hinted at an explanation far stranger than I could have anticipated. It was a connection, a clue, a thread that, if followed, might unravel the impossible. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding, feeling a mix of fear and exhilaration. I realized that this journey was far from over. The impossible was not merely a medical anomaly, it was a doorway into something larger, something that would challenge my understanding of life itself. And though I didn't yet know where it would lead, I knew one thing: I had to follow it, no matter how uncertain or frightening the path might be. The following days were some of the most surreal I had ever experienced. I found myself walking through life in a fog, hyper-aware of every sensation, every heartbeat, every breath, as if my body had become a riddle I needed to solve. I would glance at my reflection in the mirror and study my skin, my eyes, the subtle lines that told the story of 63 years of living. Could my body really be harboring something impossible? Something that defied decades of scientific understanding? Dr. Matthews had scheduled a follow-up appointment with additional tests. "We need to be thorough," he explained, though I could sense his own unease behind the professional calm. I agreed, though a part of me wished I could just pretend none of this had happened and return to the comfort of my ordinary routine. But the curiosity, the undeniable pull of the unknown, would not let me. I wanted answers, and I wanted them now. When I arrived at the lab, the sterile smell hit me again, but this time it felt almost electric. Each step I took toward the testing room carried the weight of anticipation. The nurses were kind, cheerful even, but I could only half listen as they explained the procedures. My mind was somewhere else, entirely cycling through possibilities, imagining what the results could mean. Was it a mutation? A rare enzyme? Something completely undocumented? Every explanation seemed insufficient, every hypothesis more improbable than the last. The tests took longer than expected. I watched as vials of my blood were carefully labeled, scanned, and stored. Machines whirred, blinking with precise patterns, as if they were aware of the gravity of what they were analyzing. I half expected the machines themselves to pause, to hesitate, before confirming that something impossible had been found in the depths of my veins. By the time I returned home, exhaustion settled over me, but my mind refused to rest. I sat by the window, notebook in hand, trying to track my thoughts, my fears, my fragments of clarity. It was late afternoon, and the golden sunlight streamed across the floor, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts of questions yet unanswered. I realized that I had been living in a sort of denial, acknowledging the call, the report, the anomalies, but never fully facing the implications. Then came the call. Dr. Matthews' voice was quieter than usual, and I could sense a gravity that had not been present before. "Henry," he said, "we've completed the additional tests. I think you should come in as soon as possible." I felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with dread. Something in his tone suggested that the impossible was no longer just an idea or a mysterious word on paper. It was becoming real, tangible, undeniable. I tried to prepare myself mentally, to anticipate the worst, but deep down I sensed that this was not just about danger, it was about revelation. Something in my blood was rewriting the rules of what I thought was possible. At the clinic, Dr. Matthews ushered me into his office. He had my files spread across the desk, annotated, highlighted, full of medical terminology that now seemed like cryptic clues. "Henry, what we found," he paused, as if measuring his words. "It is unprecedented." I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. "What is it?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. He looked me squarely in the eyes. "Your blood contains a compound, a unique protein that, until now, has never been documented in humans. It's not harmful. In fact, it may be beneficial in ways we don't fully understand. But its existence is impossible, according to all known science." Impossible, the word returned, heavier than before. My mind struggled to process it. How could this be? A part of me wanted to laugh, another to cry. I had always been fascinated by science, by the wonders of biology, but nothing had prepared me for this, a living contradiction, a secret my body had carried for decades without my knowledge. Dr. Matthews continued, explaining that the protein could potentially unlock new insights into human health, aging, and resilience. "It's like finding a hidden code in the blueprint of life," he said. "We need to study it further. But Henry, you are extraordinary in a way that is almost beyond comprehension." I sat back, overwhelmed. Extraordinary? Me? After 63 years of living an ordinary, careful life, I suddenly found myself thrust into the spotlight of something beyond ordinary. It wasn't just about my health anymore. It was about a discovery that could ripple far beyond my own existence. As I left the clinic, the late afternoon sun painted everything in hues of gold and orange. The streets, the trees, even the air itself felt different, charged with possibility. I realized that my life was no longer just the sum of routines and memories. It had become part of something larger, something unknown, something impossible yet real. I spent the evening reflecting, alone but not lonely, marveling at the strangeness of it all. I thought of Susan, and how I would tell her this incredible truth. I thought of our years together, the ordinary moments that had led me to this extraordinary revelation. And I understood, in a way I hadn't before, that life has a rhythm that sometimes surprises us in the most unimaginable ways. This discovery was not an ending. It was a beginning of questions, exploration, and possibilities I could barely imagine. And deep down I felt a thrill, a spark of hope and curiosity that had long lain dormant. The impossible had entered my life, and I was ready to face it, piece by piece, until its secrets were fully revealed. After that visit to Dr. Matthews, life felt both familiar and alien at the same time. Every morning, I would wake up, expecting the ordinary routines of breakfast, news, and quiet reflection. But now, even the simplest actions were tinged with a sense of wonder, of uncertainty. I walked more slowly, noticing the way sunlight fell on the floors, the way the air smelled after rain, the subtle rhythms of my own heartbeat. My body, which I had once taken for granted, now felt like an enigma, a vessel harboring something extraordinary that I could neither fully see nor understand. I began to notice subtle changes. At first, they were minor: a sudden surge of energy in the middle of the afternoon, sharper focus when reading, an unusual clarity of thought. I chalked it up to excitement, or perhaps to the adrenaline that had been coursing through me since discovering the impossible in my blood. But soon, it became undeniable. My reactions were faster. My senses, taste, touch, even hearing, felt more acute. I would close my eyes and notice tiny shifts in the room, the faintest hums or vibrations that had previously gone unnoticed. Dr. Matthews had warned me not to jump to conclusions, to remain patient while further studies were conducted. "We don't know the full implications yet," he said, "but you are experiencing something unique, something unprecedented. Document it, observe it, and stay aware of every change." I did exactly that. I began keeping detailed logs, not just of symptoms, but of experiences, moments when a memory surfaced with unusual vividness, times when I felt an unexplained surge of strength or alertness. Even the smallest sensations, the flutter of my heart, the pulse in my fingertips, I wrote them down meticulously. It was like creating a personal diary of the impossible, a record of a reality that refused to fit conventional understanding. Susan noticed the changes, too. She was curious at first, asking questions about my energy, my focus, and the intensity with which I seemed to observe the world. But as days turned into weeks, even she could see the difference. One evening, as we sat quietly on the porch watching the sunset, she said, "You're different. Not just in how you act, but in how you see things." I nodded, unable to find the right words. How could I explain that my blood, something I had never thought twice about, was changing the way I experienced life itself? And yet, with the extraordinary came unease. I became acutely aware of my own fragility, of the delicate balance between discovery and danger. The impossible finding in my blood was unprecedented, yes, but what if there were consequences we hadn't anticipated? What if this anomaly, so remarkable and promising, carried hidden risks? The thought gnawed at me, a subtle anxiety lurking beneath the surface of my fascination. I returned to Dr. Matthews several times, each visit revealing new nuances. Tests, scans, and observations suggested that the unique protein in my blood could potentially enhance resilience, slow certain cellular degeneration, and even improve immune response. The scientific possibilities were staggering, yet so uncertain that every prediction felt like stepping into the unknown. I tried to remain grounded, but the weight of living with such a secret and impossibility that existed within me was both exhilarating and isolating. One night, I sat at my desk, reviewing weeks of notes and observations. The house was silent, save for the soft hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the floorboards. I realized something profound. My life, ordinary and predictable for so long, had transformed into something extraordinary. The impossible was no longer abstract. It was tangible, real, living within me. And yet, the question remained, what did this mean for the future? For Susan, for us, for the life we had built together? Sleep became irregular. I would wake at odd hours, heart racing, mind alive with possibilities. I imagined conversations with scientists, discoveries yet to be made, a life that could extend beyond the limits I had once accepted. But alongside the excitement was a quiet fear, the fear of the unknown. Every extraordinary gift carries a shadow, and I could feel that shadow pressing close, reminding me that the impossible is never without consequence. Despite the uncertainty, a sense of purpose emerged. I began to see each day as an opportunity to observe, to learn, to explore the effects of this anomaly in a deliberate way.